Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. We'll wait for Mr. Bailey to get seated. And while we're waiting for him to get seated, I'd like to call Reverend John Purington up from the Methodist Church. He is the newest pastor in town. And one of the strikes that most of you have against me is that I went to the University of Florida. You have two strikes against him. He went to Florida State, and his son is at Georgia Tech. So anyway, super nice guy, super addition to our community, and I'd appreciate it if you would take the chair and lead the invocation.
You want me to pray after that?
Yeah.
Let us pray, give thanks. Lord, we thank you. You're so good to us in so many ways. For the grace of just a beautiful day, the grace of gathering to look over this community that you've given to us, we give thanks. I pray for your blessing on each of these servant leaders here and for all those in the community that have come out because they care deeply about where they live. We pray that we would honor you in all that we do and that we would love you more with each growing day. Lord, it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, John. And if you get a chance and you're looking for a church, the Methodist Church will be more than happy to have you. And when you go in and you listen to John preach, you actually learn something. You're not being preached at, you're being spoken to. So there's a little plug for the Methodist Church. Okay, now we'll call the meeting to order. And again, thank you for being here. Let the record reflect that all members of the council are present, save Ms. Malcolm. She was unable to call in tonight. I need a motion for the approval of the agenda, please.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion by Mr. Larry Bradley. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second by Ms. Crawford. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Moving to the approval of the consent agenda. These are the council minutes from last month. Planning Commission, Executive Session, Historic Preservation, Downtown Development, and CVB. I need a motion for the approval of the consent agenda, please.
Move to approve.
A motion by Mr. Little. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Gregory. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Moving to the public presentation of the Walton Teen Advocacy Board, did Ms. Finn, right here in the front. At the moment, it had been canceled, and unfortunately, there were some interviews that the kids wanted to do, but I did want Tish to say hello and talk to you about a couple of things that they're addressing right now.
My apologies that you're seeing me and not a group of sweet teenagers who have the best interest of their community in their mind, but we did want to let you guys know what we're up to now. We have a couple of initiatives that we've been continuing for the last couple years, but what we really want from the council tonight and from everybody in town is how can we best serve going forward? So what you have in front of you is a list of both our current projects and ideas for future projects. The main thing we have going is we were fortunate enough to be awarded a grant during COVID for some really nice production equipment. Cameras, lighting, sound equipment, and we've been using that to do live streams of events at schools, community events, and what we'd really like to do is do some interviews of local folks to go and do spotlights on businesses. I spoke with Mayor Howard about that, and just sort of expand our offerings, sort of as a news channel, but also for entertainment and other purposes. I won't go through this whole list, but again, just to let you know, sort of, we want to plan our next year to 18 months. We are a not-for-profit, so we seek grant funds. We have community partnerships that we work with. We work with Walton County Schools and all of the private, public, and home schools in town. We have a board of 20 teenagers and 5 college students. And so our hearts are open and we're working hard, and we just want to know what we can do to help you guys going forward.
Thank you so much for being here. Are there any questions for Ms. Finn?
How do people get on the council?
We have information on our website. It's an application process. We usually have panel interviews that take place in the fall and in the spring. We are full now of kids. We usually take about 25, and we have about 20 who are active. But we do take interviews on a rotating basis too, if someone's recommended.
What she had talked about doing was interviewing candidates prior to the last election. Some scheduling issues didn't work out. And I think one of the things that would probably be most beneficial, at least to the businesses and the people who really build Monroe from the inside, is by going in and working with these businesses, setting up maybe video chats or online advertising, or just letting them tell their stories. So the way the kids can learn technology, videography, interview skills, public relations, it's really something to behold. And those kids who did the phones down night at the courthouse.
Right, we did the Look Up event in town a couple months ago where everybody came and checked their phones in downtown, and yeah, you came out there. That was
Right, so anytime, and I'll always say this, anytime a person wants to come make our part of the world a better place, we are more than excited to have them. I appreciate what you do with those kids, and I appreciate
Thank you.
what they give to the community.
Thank
And if anybody has any questions, any more questions, please reach out to Tish. I think her contact information is, she's at admin@waltonadvocates.org.
Yep, and the phone number's on there too, so.
And if we have anybody at home watching, Tish Finn, ladies and gentlemen.
Let us know how we can help. We're busy, but we're ready.
Thank you so much for coming in. Moving to the public forum, we have 2 public comments tonight. We have Ms. Elizabeth Jones, followed by Mr. Robert Kelly. Ms. Jones?
Hey, y'all.
Thank you for coming in.
My name's Elizabeth Jones. I'm on the HPC. I'm here to speak with y'all tonight about 1238 South Madison, which was,
Before we do that, I'm sorry, and I
Sorry.
saw Mr. Kelly's here too, and we're going to do the public discussion on that in just a couple of minutes. So you can either address this now, or you can wait till we get to the public hearing part.
Oh.
But you can't do both.
okay, well, let's just wait until we get to the public hearing part, I think, or whatever we get closer to that then, if
Okay.
it's better.
That's fine. Mr. Kelly? Is that okay? Do it. Oh, okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Other than that, we have no one else signed up for public comment. And we'll move to the public hearing, which is the rezone at 140 Blaine Street. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, this is a rezone request at the city's behest for 140 Blaine Street. There's been a master plan developed on that, and I believe the Lord Atkins Sergeant is here with their presentation, and Sadie or Chris or Brad might have something to say about that. They were on the team that worked with them to develop that.
Great, thank you.
I will go ahead unless Sadie, you want to say anything, or?
This is Bob Beagle from Lord Atkins Sergeant.
Hey, hello.
Thank you, Bob.
I
Thank you for
hesitate to
coming.
say this, but you mentioned the 2 strikes. I have the same 2 strikes. I went to Georgia Tech, and my daughter's currently at Florida State, so I may need to go flag to pass her down on that one. Again, yeah, sorry. My name is Bob Beagle. I'm an architect with Lord Atkins Sergeant. We are a consulting team that was hired by you all to do a master plan for the 140 Blaine Street property. We started in June. You mentioned it. We had a really good working team. So Logan, Chris, and Brad is somewhere, and Sadie, there he is. And then I have Julia on my staff, Julia Doolittle, who actually grew up here in Monroe, so that worked out well for us. So we had a really good team. We started in June. We did some site tours. We talked to some neighbors. We did some visioning sessions we thought was real important before we just dove in and tried to create a master plan. We sort of did some broad-based visioning of what we thought this could be. And then we tried to figure out from there, then how do we codify that? How do we turn that into something that we could zone? So I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to hit everything that's in your, I think you have an agenda package that has the full master plan. I'm not going to go through all that, but I'm happy to come back and answer any specific questions. So again, we have some upfront pieces that are really about the design and how the sort of code part of it of what we're trying to give the city a tool to redevelopment this property. And then there's some back-end pieces that were a little bit more flexible, not intended to be zoning, but more design guideline oriented, so that when your staff is entertaining developers, they could kind of say, we want it to look like this, not like that. So you'll see that's how it kind of lays out. I think most of you are probably familiar with this property. This is where the police station is now. It's characterized by a whole lot of surface parking, big, huge parking lot, and not a lot else. There's the remaining part of the strip center, which was also part of our study, and you'll see how we kind of looked at that. We did think it was important to look a little beyond the site, even though we didn't master plan beyond the site, because there's some considerations for opportunities for some shared parking and some of those kind of things. So to the extent this gets redeveloped and really becomes a district for this east side of downtown, those could come to play down the road. I think you all know this area pretty well, or at least some of you do, and I think our take on it, as you're, after talking to your staff and seeing it, is this is sort of a little bit of a forgotten side of downtown. It's not that far from downtown, so it really has some opportunity, and I think the city purchasing this property, renovating and putting in the police department, those are all kind of catalytic things that could have a really big difference here. So let me just walk you through, if my laser works, it does. I'm going to walk you through just some of the big design moves. So this is sort of the north side. So we have Blaine Street here, Hammond Street here. We have the bridge over here. Athens, is it Athens Tech, right? Right next door. And of course, we have the big church right here. So this area here is the police station was renovated, the municipal court. This is a site plan. You'll see a few pictures here in a minute of what that kind of could look like. So with the first move was really creating sort of a retail heart, an entertainment zone, so a little bit of small scale infill commercial buildings oriented around a small open space. For anyone who's familiar, we sort of modeled that after Parsons Alley in Duluth, and other projects very similar. It has that very quaint feel. We did spend some time thinking about how you could renovate the front of that shopping center and break it down so it wasn't such a suburban linear strip center, and became a little bit more of a sort of organic feel of different storefronts and different kinds of things that could happen to support the district. We also looked at the backside, very unique situation here with a strip center that kind of faces one way, and then the normal loading dock side is really on a public street. So it's sort of an odd condition, so we really thought about, well, what could you do on the backside? So things like offices and services as a way to have really two front doors to that. And then sort of a residential piece around another open space on the bottom, so that we're creating sort of a live, work, play district, that it's not just a shopping center, it's not just an entertainment district, it's not just a civic police station court, it also has people living there 24/7, so it creates a little bit more of a dynamic district. So just some images. Again, this is sort of looking up that Northway. We thought it was sort of a good idea to do sort of a 3D model here, so this is a quickie digital model just to give some sense of what that can feel like in terms of height and mass and scale. We did not go so far as to say the architecture has to look exactly like this, or every brick has to be exactly in this place. We thought that might constrict you a little bit when you're trying to go find developers. So you'll see, as I get into this, we put in a little bit of flexibility in terms of what could happen within some ranges. These are sort of the site plan controls, so things that we looked to sort of codify and put in the zoning ordinance. So we have build to zones, so we're saying very specifically the front of the building must come here. So instead of just a big envelope of anywhere it could go, front of the buildings have to go here. Places where sidewalks should go, places where green spaces should go, and approximate sizes that go with them. Parking, we looked very carefully at parking. Our goal was, of course, not to recreate that giant sea of parking, but rather to break it up and create a little bit more of a street feel, even in the inside of the development, and that's what those street types are at the end. We also created a little bit of sub-areas. So we have a sub-area 1, which is the commercial sub-area, sub-area 2, which is where sort of the residential piece would go. Sub-area 3 is the renovation of the existing commercial space, and then sub-area 4 is the civic node. And in each of those zones, we've created some metrics that go into your zoning ordinance, so that when you're negotiating with a developer or working through a development scenario, these are the kinds of things that they have to follow. I think it's always important in things like this where it's very difficult to proactively create a precise development. So I think these will be great tools to have, but I think they're also good to, your staff can, over time, as you're negotiating and talking to developers, may revisit some of these things. So these are things like how many square feet of commercial or residential space can you build within each of those sub-areas? How many floors, how tall would they be? How many units? Maximum facade lengths, we thought that was important. We didn't want these to create big, huge buildings, wanted to create smaller buildings. Shared open space, parking, tenant size. We put in a limit on tenant size. So I think the vision that we all came up with was not to have a big, say, a huge shopping center or a big store, kind of big box kind of place, but more of a smaller tenant kind of place. So those are the kinds of things that get regulated in the development controls. And then this area, these sections, we have 10 of these pages. These are sort of elements of style. So this is all the part that's not part of the zoning code, at least in our mind. It's sort of meant to be design guideline oriented and give your staff some tools to convey to developers of what we do want to see and what we don't want to see. So each one of these sections about commercial style, residential style, open spaces, parking, all those things, kind of a lot of pictures and images to help convey it. And then finally, the last piece of that was stormwater. We did think it was very important to at least be mindful of how stormwater works here. So overall, we're reducing the amount of impervious area from what is there now by almost an acre, and think we have some really good opportunities to do sort of a distributed stormwater management kind of system eventually. So with that, again, I know that's a lot of stuff, and I skimmed through a whole bunch of it, but I'm happy to answer any questions or come back to any of that, or if any of you all that worked on this want to jump in.
Are there any questions for Bob? Or Sadie, or Chris, or Logan?
It's beautiful. I love it.
Really, really does look
Yeah,
good.
we're excited about it. Could be really neat.
I think that's it.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming. It looks
You
really
bet.
good.
Thank you.
Good job.
So I'll declare this portion of the meeting open for public input. Are there any comments, anyone who'd like to speak in favor? Anybody who would like to speak against the rezone? We'll revisit that in just a few minutes, and I'll declare that portion of the meeting closed. Moving to the approval of the Valdosta Housing Authority to issue revenue bonds for the local apartment rehab project. Mr. Probst?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Again, as discussed last week, Valdosta Housing Authority is looking to, for our authorization to operate essentially within the city of Monroe. The Monroe Housing Authority has also approved a resolution stating such. Basically, they're a conduit financing authority for some private renovations. And in this case, in the city of Monroe, there's an apartment complex off Plaza Trace, Country Grove Apartments, that will be renovated as part of this overall bond that the Valdosta Housing Authority is putting together.
Thank you, Logan. Are there any questions? Hearing none, I'll declare this portion of the meeting open for public input. Is there anyone here who would like to speak in favor? Is there anyone here who would like to speak against? Okay, I'll declare that portion of the meeting closed. There'll be no action taken, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Moving to the zoning ordinance code text amendment number 12. Mr. Kelly?
Yes, sir. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. This amendment adds the conditional use of private sewage treatment facility to Section 630 of Table 6 in the zoning ordinance, and also modifies Section 650.4 special site requirements by removing the minimum area required for planned districts and reducing street frontage requirements in the LCI district.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions for Patrick? Hearing none, I'll declare this portion of the meeting open for public comment. Is there anyone who'd like to speak in favor of the ordinance? Loud crowd tonight. Anyone who'd like to speak against the ordinance? I'll declare that portion of the meeting closed. We'll revisit that in just a few moments. Moving to the certificate of appropriateness for the demolition appeal, 1238 South Madison Avenue. Mr. Kelly?
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is just an appeal of a decision made at HPC, which denied the demolition of a structure at that address, 1238 South Madison Avenue. The applicants are here to present their appeal, and that's all I got on that one.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Patrick? Has everyone visited the site? I'll declare this portion of the meeting open for the purpose of public input. I believe Mr. and Mrs. Parker are here. Might come to you in just 1 second. Prior to that, is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who'd like to speak against this appeal? Yes, sir. Mr. Kelly? No, sorry. Go ahead. Your name?
My name is Neil Howard, no relation. I own the property immediately north of 1238, and I just want to say that we are very much in favor of what Mr. Parker is proposing. you go down South Madison, you know, some houses are in really good shape and really maintained, some houses not so much. And the house that he's talking about demoing for the purpose of putting some other houses there really appealed to my wife and I. We think it would be to the benefit of the neighborhood to do that, so.
I appreciate your coming in. Thank you. Mr. and Ms. Parker, would you like to say something? Thank you all for coming in.
My name is Lawrence Parker. This is my wife, Lisa. I'm the owner of Regen Properties, which is a local redevelopment-focused real estate company. We are partners, and my wife is a licensed real estate agent. We're active in the Monroe community. We do business at Metro Monroe. We're Walton County residents in our second home in Walton County. We've been here for 6 or 7 years, and we love the area, and we wanted to participate in the redevelopment of the Monroe area. We submitted a request for a demolition permit for 1238 because we conducted an extensive inspection of the property, and it was found to be in a state of disrepair, which was much worse than we thought it was. The foundation, floor structure, there are mold issues. Every major system in the property is deteriorated. We submitted a cost analysis of the cost to rehab the property compared to the cost of new construction, and we have those numbers available if anyone would like to see them.
I would, if you don't mind.
And we only printed up 5 packets, so we didn't know exactly how many we would need.
Throw a couple on that side to each of them, and then I'll drop off on this side if you like.
We included a letter from our contractor who has built over 100 homes and 50 subdivisions, and he has annotated his professional opinion about the state of the property and the condition of the property, basically due to poor repairs and poor maintenance in the past. The cost to replace this particular structure, you would have to almost deconstruct it all the way down to building a new foundation and then building a structure on top of it. So you're basically building a new house, but saying you're trying to save that house. But it's really deteriorated quite a bit. Do you have anything you want to say? And if anyone has any questions that I could answer.
Are there any questions for Mr. Parker? Or Mrs. Parker?
Have you looked into the potential, or to potentially moving the house?
Moving the house? Well, the cost of that, well, the stability of the house, I don't think would make that a possibility. Initially, we submitted photos, then they told us we submitted too many. We scaled it down to 15 photos, but you can see the foundation is deteriorated. The mortar is like powder in between the bricks. The floor, it's on a crawl space, so the floor structure, which would normally be supported by the crawl space, the floor structure is falling down inside the house. So in some areas of the house, you may have a gap from the floor to the wall, like where carpet would be, and then in other places, the gap is like this, where the floor structure is actually falling down out of the house.
And so what our builder is saying that whatever if we only could tear it down, whatever he put on top of that, whatever he did, it still would be compromised because there's nothing there that can support any type of building.
Right.
Unless you basically start all over with a new foundation and come up.
So rebuild the house.
Right. Right.
Okay.
That's all I had, Mayor.
I have a question for you. I want to make sure we're all on the same page about how these appeals work. These are not basically rehearings of what the historic board has done. We have a statute that says that you have to show that the HPC abused its discretion in reaching the decision that it reached. So my question to you is, how did the HPC abuse its discretion?
Well, what I would say is, in the consideration of the cost to repair that structure, they didn't take that into consideration compared to the cost and the safety elements. Considering the safety elements of a new construction, it would eliminate a lot of the problems you have with a structure of that age.
That's not the standard. How did they abuse their discretion? I mean, you presented all that to them.
Well,
They weighed all of those factors.
the only way
made a
that I could,
decision. How was that an abuse of their discretion?
well, my opinion would be that in presenting this information about the structure, the lady on the board said she loves that house. And I don't think that relates to the condition of the house that I was presenting. She said that's her favorite house on that street, but it doesn't address the facts that I was presenting about the condition of the house and the feasibility of trying to rebuild the house.
And the
Ms.
fact that she did not, when we showed her a picture of the house, she didn't even recognize it. So there just seemed to be some kind of,
Well,
Yeah, we showed her a picture of the house. She said, "What house is that?" I
that's
said, "This
the
is
house,
1238.
the one you love.
okay, but just for clarification, the standard is not whether you could build something else for less
Oh, I understand.
cost to restore the historic house. If that was true, Monroe would have no historic houses. They'd just all be torn down. And when I was looking through your material, you know, I mean, I've restored, I think, 19 historic houses. I've looked at that one. I haven't crawled under it, but they're all built the same way. They're all built on brick columns. And I will guarantee your problem is you've just got some collapsed brick columns under there. Those can be rebuilt, or you can use the steel industrial jacks and do the same.
Along with the, like the exterior perimeter of the foundation.
That exterior perimeter doesn't even support the building. And what you've got is there'll be a series
Columns.
of brick columns, and they're
Joists going.
inside, under your main load-bearing beams. They're also around the outside. Then you've got brick that simply fills in between the columns, but the columns are what carry the weight of the house, not the underpinning brick. That doesn't even carry weight. They're all built the same. I mean, I'm telling you, I've done
I understand.
19 of them.
I've been under there, and they've shown deterioration in the columns and in the perimeter.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying they're not deteriorated, because they're made with that, what they call soft mortar. It's a high sand mortar.
Yes.
And sometimes people screw them up because they'll go in and try to repoint them using moderate mortar. That doesn't work, it just cracks those bricks. They're not made, they weren't fired for that kind of mortar. So you have to mix sand and mortar if you're gonna restore them. Those are all my questions.
Are there any other questions or comments for the Parkers?
I got a quick question. How long does this appeal go? Does this have to be settled tonight? Because I actually would like to take a minute to go over there and actually look at that house. And talk to the historic probation to see what their real issue with as far as demolishing the house.
No, it doesn't have to be settled tonight.
That-
And it's, you know, if you take a look and it supports, you know, the documents, that's helpful, you know. So I would encourage you to, you know, take a look at it.
So for clarification, could I ask council, once they have filed the appeal, that's the only time frame that's imposed, correct?
That's correct. They timely filed their appeal under our code of ordinances. And if this body, in deliberating on the appeal, wanted to make a motion to table it for consideration at a later date, that certainly would be appropriate. And just to follow up on Mr. Dickinson said, and we can send you this if you want to, but our code of ordinances, it's chapter 54, so we have a specific a chapter in our code of ordinances that addresses historic preservation, where it addresses how appeals are done. It also addresses what are the standards to be looked at when approving or not approving requests for demolition. And specifically, there's a list of 7 criteria that the lower board, the Historic Preservation Commission, is obligated to consider when making a decision on whether to approve or not approve a request for a demolition, which this was. And that's section 54-174, subsection B. And I'm happy to go over that with any of the council members who would like to see it. You are the appeal board. Your review level is, as Mr. Dickinson said, it's an abuse of discretion. It's a higher standard. It's not a de novo. You're not retrying the facts. You're not rehearing everything. You're seeing whether or not they abused their discretion in the decision they made of saying no to this demolition. But specifically to your question, Mr. Garrett, if you wanted to make a motion to table this, that would be completely appropriate. I would suggest that you finish your public hearing and let anyone and everyone who wants to speak on the matter speak tonight, for or against, and then when it comes back to you for action, that would be an appropriate time to address a potential motion to table. And then that way, everyone's had an opportunity to be heard, and then y'all could gather more facts as you deliberate in between meetings.
Okay. Is that good, Norman?
It is.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Are there any other questions of the Parkers? Thank you so much for coming in. I think you know the direction we're about to take, but we want to have some folks who wanted to speak.
Let's just make sure, let's make sure, because I know they got interrupted with some questions. I want them to have, is there any other presentation, anything else you'd like to say? I just want them to have full opportunity to speak, because I know y'all got a few questions in between your comments.
No, I have nothing further to say.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in. Now, to speak against in favor of upholding the Historical Preservation Commission, I have 2 who would like to speak, Ms. Jones and Mr. Kelly.
Hello again. I actually was not here for the HPC meeting. I'm on the HPC, but I was not here for the HPC meeting when they heard this the first time. I was actually in Mississippi. But I am on the HPC. My name is Elizabeth Jones. I'm also a student with the College of Environment and Design, University of Georgia. I'm finishing some edits on my master's thesis right now. But tonight, I'm here to speak with you about 1238 South Madison. I did some research on it on Friday. I was at the record room on Hammond. I was able to jump ahead in my research a little bit because there was a reference in a deed book. There was a reference to a deed book in Q Public, book 110, page 101. And I've given a few of you this in a packet. And the page references the following. One house and lot located on the Old Monroe Social Circle Highway in the section known as Speedway and known as the R.F. Kelly Home Place. Said lot contains 1 acre or more or less and is bounded as follows. East by the Old Monroe Social Circle Highway, north by Mrs. O.C. Blassingame, west by Georgia Railroad, south by Paul Cleaton. So it references R.F. Kelly, and we wonder, who is R.F. Kelly? Well, I have a picture. And I've included this in the packet that I gave to y'all. Richard Frederick Kelly is pictured in the top middle of the photo. He is the great-grandfather of Bob Kelly, sitting here in the red shirt. I was able to contact him. From Bob, I was able to gather a significant amount of historic data. Richard's father was James, who was killed in the Civil War. Richard's father mustered out of Walton County with Company C in Georgia, as mentioned on page 698 of Anita Sam's book, Wayfarers of Walton. That was George Hillier's regiment, for those of you who know who he was. Richard was a farmer when the land around the airport area was farmland. His grandson, Bob's Uncle Billy, was killed in a cottonseed plant accident. Richard married Georgia Queen, who is buried in the Queen Cemetery. And I'd like to do a little more deed research, but I ran out of time, so that's what I have for you tonight. I also want to add, John, that Laura has told me that she had called WLA, the firm that's doing our resurveying of the districts, and they were starting with this property at the beginning of the survey, so they should by now have that data. So if you guys do table this, they should have that resurvey to kind of to look at. So
In that.
I don't know if that would be pertinent or new information
we can look
for
at
you.
that. That's,
Well, they might though have an analysis though of their thoughts on it if y'all wanted to take that into consideration.
right. We won't take any new information into consideration. It's just whether or not the commission abused their power for us. We can't keep bringing up new evidence.
I understand.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Yes, sir.
My
Thank
name
you
is
for coming in.
Robert Kelly. I'm the great-grandson of Richard Frederick Kelly, which this is his old home place. It's kind of hard for me to talk about the home place without giving you just a little bit of history about the Kellys in Walton County. I'll be real brief. James Kelly moved to Walton County in 1840s. He married Frances Barrett out of Good Hope, and they bore 10 children. In 1861, we all knew what was happening, and so James enlisted into Company C, the 9th Georgia, Hillier's Rifles, here out of Monroe. And he fought, was a prisoner of war, fought again. However, he fell at the Battle of Spotsylvania, Courthouse, Virginia, leaving behind 10 children. Richard Barrett was 10 years old at that time. Richard stayed on with his mother and helped with the farm. And between 1900 and 1910, he moved to South Madison. At that time, it was just Madison. Built the home. So the age of the home would be between 1900 and 1910. So approximately 110 years old. Makes it historical as far as I'm concerned. However, I'll go a little bit faster. I apologize, I don't speak in front of people very often.
No worries, you're fine.
Richard married my great-grandmother, and they bore, here we are, 10 children. One being my grandfather. My grandfather, they were raised on South Madison. He married Willie Crossley, the daughter of Columbus Monroe Crossley, and they moved to South Madison. And they raised, here we go, 8 children, one being my dad. I'm saying all this to tell you the love of Walton County by the Kellys. My dad was a graduate of Monroe High School. He went on and played 2 years football at Monroe A&M, which is also a high school. So a little bit of illegal recruiting there, I think, by the coach. However, he was a part of the group that went up to Washington, D.C. and played a charity game and was able to go, and their group went into the White House and met FDR, which was obviously one of the finest times of his life. The second finest time of his life is when he found out that I was moving to Walton County. I was raised, not obviously, but I was raised in DeKalb County because after World War II, my dad moved. I'll digress. My dad was part of Battery B, the 214th National Guard here out of Monroe. Fought in World War II along with his 3 brothers. Another one was part of Battery B as well. Thank God they all came back safe. However, after the war, really the only way they could make a living is and raise families is they moved to Atlanta. In 2002, I moved with my family back to Walton County. So we've had 6 generations of Kellys that have a love of Walton County. I've included pictures of the home place that I took yesterday. So these are current pictures of it. I've also included, I talk about the love of Walton County by the Kellys. My uncle, along with the desire for all the Kelly family, wanted to be buried together. They all had plots in Rest Haven, in Decatur, but they all wanted to be buried together. So my uncle purchased the property right next to the cemetery and turned around and got approval from the city council and had that deeded that over to the county, and he leveled the property and I apologize. He deeded over to the county for additional cemetery so that my family could be buried there, be buried together. The Kellys love Walton County. They love the home place. I was raised, even though I lived in DeKalb County, my dad would bring us out several times a year and drive us by all the old home place, which includes 1238. Also, there's several other properties on South Madison that they would drive us by, and obviously we would visit the cemetery. Thank you for your time. I just wanted to give you just a little history of the Kellys in Walton County, but also the love of Walton County by the Kellys.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Are there any questions? Hearing none, I'll declare that portion of the meeting closed. We'll take no action at this time. We'll revisit that in just a moment, and then we'll talk about the table. Moving to new business, we have the rezone at 140 Blaine Street. I'll open the floor to council members only for discussion.
I have a motion, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I move to approve the rezone.
A motion by Mr. Dickinson to approve, and I think I heard a second coming from Mr. Ross Bradley.
Yes, sir.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Moving to the certificate of appropriateness for the demolition appeal at 1238 South Madison Avenue. I'll open the floor to council members for discussion.
I have
Um,
I just word a question.
Yes, sir.
If I understood Ms. Rosenthal a few minutes ago, there were specific reasons for the HPC ruling, is that correct?
There are specific criteria that
Criteria.
the HPC is to consider when considering a request to, when considering whether or not to approve or deny a certificate of appropriateness for the demolition of a building, yes.
When I look at the minutes of the HPC meeting, I don't see any discussion of that. Does anyone, staff, know if HPC reviewed these 7 criteria before they made the decision?
I cannot answer that question because I was not at the meeting.
Mr. Kelly?
Specific mention of those 7 criteria was not made during the meeting. I don't know what they did in their personal deliberations considering the matter.
I have a question. Looking at the pictures, I think I passed the one to you just a minute ago, the larger one. How accurate architecturally does this need to be? So looking at the columns on the front, for instance, look like they might have come out of Home Depot in 1985. So when reviewing a house and saying it's her favorite house and then being unable to pick it out when actually looking at the picture of it, that doesn't sound good. And I'm looking at you, Mr. Dickinson, because you're the most senior historical guy. Not that you're older than everybody.
You know, I'm sensitive about being called old, but go ahead.
So, at what point do we go, look, it has too many cosmetic changes? This really.
Cosmetic doesn't enter into it, I don't think. Obviously, a lot of these older houses over the years, they've been what is called remodeled. So people will come along and, without getting on too much of a soapbox about it, they will not pay the money that it takes to get the porch columns that are appropriate, because you can't just go down to Home Depot and buy them. You have to have them made. So they go to Home Depot and they get some cheap replacement, stick it on there. It's wrong. Folks do that sometimes with windows. They do it with trim features on these houses. That doesn't affect the structural integrity of the house. And so what I was asking the Parkers was, you know, is this house really so bad off that it cannot be saved? That's really the standard, I think. When you go through the 7 criteria that the HPC is to consider, that's really the standard. Is a situation where it simply cannot be saved. So I don't know, and that's why I agree with Mr. Garrett that I think we might need to look at this a little more, because that is the standard. Did they violate the standard? Did they abuse their discretion as a deliberative body? So, for example, if Mr. and Ms. Parker took the case to court, that would be what a court would look at. And in this proceeding under the city ordinance, that's essentially what we do as the council. Is we don't consider it anew. De novo is the legal term. We look at it to say, did they abuse their discretion in making the decision that they made?
And that would look like if they didn't meet the 7 criteria, for instance.
Yeah, if they didn't even consider them. If these folks came in and said, well, we want to demolish the house, and that board just said, well, you can't do it. They didn't listen to them. They didn't consider anything. They didn't analyze anything. They just said no. That would be an abuse of discretion, in my opinion.
Prior to tabling, Norman, do we have any other questions or comments about this?
I don't want to still.
Just a moment, the question I asked earlier about what HPC did, because I think it pertains to what Mr. Dickinson's point is here. I can't tell what criteria HPC used to make this denial. There's nothing in the minutes that lets me know what they did. So I don't know how I can rule on Mr. Parker's idea without knowing whether they violated his rights or whatever or not until I know what they did. I don't know. There's nothing in the minutes that tells me what they used as the criteria for denial, so I can't tell whether or not the Parkers have a legitimate argument about the way it was done. And I think we have to have that. I agree with what Mr. Garrett's going to do, but, you know, when it comes back, we need to understand that.
Well, before Mr. Garrett does that, is it possible for us to ask them to send that to us? Is there a place where they've written this down, or can we send it back to HPC? Like, is there another option besides, or is this it?
I don't want to get too deep into this because, if there's a desire to preserve the record and they are the appellant, then that obligation would fall upon the appellant, the person appealing, the folks who are appealing the decision of HPC. I have not reviewed the minutes of HPC. There may be a video stream recording or an audio recording of that meeting. It's not required to be taken, but it may be available. I don't know. We could certainly check into that. And if it's available, get it for you for your consideration. That would be appropriate for you to consider in terms of looking at the record below. But Mr. Dickinson is right. Your decision is whether or not that discretion was abused. They are a discretionary board beneath you, and whether or not they abuse that discretion. It's in the range of review standards, it is more on the higher end of what we call a deference standard, meaning you lend deference to the decision that they made unless there is a clear abuse of that discretion, is the way the terminology is usually rendered. If you want more of a specific legal opinion, we certainly can give it to you on what that standard is, but you certainly can consider the record below. But right now, the only record below that I know of is that which you have in terms of the meeting minutes. If there is an audio recording and anything that the appellant, that the Parkers have brought to present to you, it would be their obligation generally to create a recordation of the meeting other than just the Secretary of HPC's recording of the meeting minutes.
Thank you, Ross. Or did you have a question too?
I didn't have a question, but just a comment that I can see both sides of it, and I appreciate their willingness to invest in furthering the community, and I understand the historical side of it, so, I don't want to steal any thunder, but
Norm?
I'd love to,
I'm gonna make a motion that we table it. Give us a chance to try to look into it and see what actually happened in that meeting. From my understanding, basically, they're appealing that, they feel like they was not really heard in the historical preservation, then, actually look into nothing. What Larry basically asking is something that we can actually find out or see for ourselves what may have took place. So I'm gonna make a motion that we table it and give us a chance to actually look into it and just see where to go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. I have a
I second
motion
that.
to table by Mr. Garrett and a second by Mr. Dickinson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. We'll revisit that. Do we need to put a specific date on it, Paul?
It'll come up at your next meeting if it doesn't have a specific date.
Till the December meeting.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Parker. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you, Ms. Jones. Moving to the second reading of GMEB's amended and restated defined benefit retirement plan ordinance. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance to amend the Georgia Municipal Employees Benefit System Plan regarding the retirement plan for the employees of City of Monroe. The Mayor and Council of the City of Monroe hereby ordain as follows. This is an ordinance to amend and restate the retirement plan for employees of the City of Monroe, Georgia, in accordance with and subject to the terms and conditions set forth in the attached adoption agreement and any addendum to the adoption agreement, the Georgia Municipal Employees Benefit System GMEB's master plan document, and the GMEB's trust agreement. When accepted by the authorized officers of the city and GMEBs, the foregoing shall constitute a contract between the city and GMEBs. All is authorized and provided by OCGA 4751 et sequitur. Be it ordained by the Mayor and Council of the City of Monroe, Georgia, and is hereby ordained by their authority thereof. Section 1, the retirement plan for the employees of the City of Monroe, Georgia is hereby amended and restated as set forth in and subject to the terms and conditions stated in the following adoption agreement, any addendum to the adoption agreement, the GMEB's master plan document, and the GMEB's trust agreement. See the attached Exhibit A. Incorporated herein by reference for the complete adoption agreement, the addendums to the adoption agreement, the GMEB's master plan document, and the GMEB's trust agreement. Section 2, except as specifically required by law or by the terms of the master plan or the adoption agreement or any addendum, the rights and obligations under the plan with respect to persons whose employment with the city was terminated or who vacated his office with the city for any reason whatsoever prior to the effective date of this ordinance are fixed and shall be governed by such plan, if any, as it existed and was in effect at the time of such termination. Section 3, the effective date of this ordinance shall be January 1, 2022. Section 4, all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith are expressly repealed. This constitutes the second reading this 9th day of November, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any questions for Paul? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
so moved.
A motion by Mr. Ross Bradley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Larry Bradley. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Moving to the first reading of the zoning ordinance code text amendment number 12, Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance of the City of Monroe, Georgia. The mayor and the council of the City of Monroe hereby ordain as follows. The zoning ordinance of the City of Monroe adopted June 10, 2014, effective July 1, 2014, as thereafter amended, is hereby amended by implementing the following text amendments and changes outlined and identified in particular detail on Exhibit A, which such exhibit is incorporated herein by reference. Exhibit A, this is amendment number 12, section 630.3, table 6, industrial zoning district land uses regulations, modifying by adding private sewage treatment facilities. Number 2, section 650.4, special site requirements, modifying special site requirements by removing the minimum area requirements for planned development districts throughout the city and inside the LCI district, and reducing the minimum frontage requirement for planned development districts located in the LCI district. All ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith are hereby repealed. These text amendments of the City of Monroe, Georgia zoning ordinance shall take effect upon their adoption by the mayor and council. This constitutes the first reading this 9th day of November. Mayor.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Mr. Rosenthal?
Not for Mr. Rosenthal, but just in general, this is basically about septic tanks, correct? That's, that, I mean, the part of it about private sewage.
No, it's more for, a business is looking to do just that, like a smaller package pre-treatment facility. We want to have that ability to do that in our code. We certainly don't have that already. It would have to meet all of our requirements to take that effluent, so it has to be fully pre-treated to certain standards. So we just simply didn't have this in the code of ordinances to even entertain such a business, yeah.
Are there any other questions? We'll have the second reading at the December 14th meeting. Moving to the resolution authorizing the Valdosta Housing Authority to exercise its powers for the purpose of financing a proposed multifamily housing project. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a resolution of the mayor and council of Monroe, Georgia, authorizing Valdosta Housing Authority to exercise its powers within the City of Monroe for the purpose of financing a proposed multifamily housing project. Whereas the mayor and council of the City of Monroe have been informed by representatives of New Country Grove LLC that the borrower and its affiliates desire to renovate an existing multifamily rental house facility located at 686 Plaza Trace, Monroe, as well as other projects located in other jurisdictions. And whereas Housing Authorities Law of the State of Georgia, as amended, and specifically OCGA 315 provides that a housing authority created for a city may exercise its powers within the territorial limits of another municipality for the purpose of, among other things, financing a project within such municipality, provided that a resolution shall have been adopted by the city in which the authority is to exercise its powers, along with any housing authority which shall have been theretofore established in such city, declaring there is a need for the housing authority to exercise its extraterritorial powers within such city. And whereas Valdosta Housing Authority has adopted an inducement resolution under which it is agreed in principle to issue revenue bonds in an amount not to exceed $11 million and to lend the proceeds of the bonds to the borrower for the purpose of financing in part the acquisition, rehabilitation, construction, development of the project and furtherance of the purposes of the act. Whereas the borrower has requested that the City Council of the City of Monroe adopt this city resolution declaring the need for the VHA to exercise its powers within the jurisdiction of the city for the sole purpose of issuing the bonds in order to finance the project. Whereas another purpose of the city resolution is to satisfy the public approval requirement of Section 147F of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 in order to qualify the interest on the bonds for exclusion from the gross income of the owners thereof for federal income tax purposes pursuant to the applicable provisions of the code. And whereas after publication of a notice at least 7 days prior to the date of this city resolution, which notice of the hearing was published in the Walton Tribune, a newspaper of general circulation in this city, on the date a public hearing was held regarding the bonds, and the project being financed in part with proceeds of the bond. And whereas the bond shall not ever represent or constitute a debt or pledge of the faith and credit of the taxing power of the city, Walton County, state of Georgia, or any political subdivision thereof, and shall be solely secured and payable from the collateral specifically pledged therefore by the borrower under the financing agreement. And whereas after careful study and investigation of the nature of the proposed project and as required by the Act, City Council has determined that it is in the best interest of the inhabitants of the city that the Valdosta Housing Authority issue these revenue bonds in one or more series to finance a project located within the boundaries of the city. Now therefore be it resolved by the Mayor and the City Council of the City of Monroe, Georgia, and is hereby resolved by the City of Monroe as follows. For the sole purpose of complying with the act, the city finds that the project will provide safe and sanitary accommodations, that the best means to facilitate the financing for the project is by authorizing the VHA to exercise its powers within the territorial boundaries of the city for the sole purpose of issuing the bonds, and that there is hereby declared a need for the VHA to exercise such extraterritorial powers. Number two, for the sole purpose of qualifying the interest on the bonds for exclusion from the gross income of the owners thereof for federal income tax purposes pursuant to applicable provisions of the code, the issuance of the bonds by the VHA and the loaning of a portion of the proceeds to the borrower for the purpose of financing in part the acquisition, rehabilitation, construction, and development of the project is approved. Number three, this approval is given solely for the purpose of compliance with the provisions of the act and the code, and in no event shall this approval constitute any obligation on the part of the city with respect to the bonds. The bonds issued by the VHA shall not constitute a debt of the city within the meaning of any constitutional or statutory provision, and the city shall have no financial obligation or responsibility with respect to the bonds or the project. This resolution shall take effect immediately upon its adoption this 9th day of November. That is the resolution, Mayor.
Nicely done. Are there any questions for Logan or Paul?
I'll move we approve.
1 second. Just for knowledge, because we're always talking about affordable housing and what this has fallen in our laps, that we're getting somebody to come in and actually upgrade existing facilities, make them more energy efficient, make the improvements, and still be able to offer affordability to the people who live here. So I think this is a win for all of us, and I have a motion for approval by Mr. Ross Bradley. Is there a second?
Second.
And a second by Mr. Norman Garrett. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Moving to the service delivery strategy update, resolution and sewer map, Logan.
Thank you, Mayor. As I briefly mentioned last week, we're working on a service delivery strategy update from the original 2019 service delivery strategy. We did a minor update in 2020 for a couple of issues. And now we're doing this one primarily driven by the Joint Development Authority of Walton, Morgan, Jasper, and Newton counties regarding Stanton Springs and what's called Stanton Springs North. And what we have to do is amend the service delivery areas for a host of issues: economic development, building inspections, utilities, fire services, so on and so forth. But they all need to be legally included into this master document. So that's issue number one. That's in this resolution. Issue number two is we're updating our sewer service map to conform with a resolution you passed earlier this year, and also for simplicity of understanding where our sewer service boundaries are, not just on a per parcel area of where sewer lines may go, but also what is actually served. So there's some very good clarification there. I want to thank Brad for and Rodney for stepping up on that map redo. But we believe this gives everybody a better, clearer view when they're coming into Monroe to understand what services we offer and where. So that's the gist of this. But again, it was primarily driven by the need to update for the JDA.
Thank you, Logan. Are there any questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution and subsequent SDS forms 1 through 4 with map exhibits as presented.
Move to approve.
I have Mr. Gregory in the second. Mr. Larry Bradley with the motion. Was that right? All right.
I didn't hear.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Moving to my update, a few things. First, Purple Hurricanes, #1 in the state, first time ever, undefeated, region champs. They play Murray County, I believe, Friday night. Also, keeping you in the loop, I've had to do a MEG meeting on Friday. Plant Vogel 3 has backed up a little bit. That's our nuclear facility that will be opening. The third phase of that will be opening in January of 2022, or first quarter 2022. And then Plant Vogel 4 will be open second quarter 2023. On the economic development front, Piedmont Industrial Park, we've just closed on a deal with Davis Water Supply. They will supply emergency water needs in the event of well, natural disasters. They will probably have, I think, 12 acres at Piedmont Industrial. They are relocating, so there won't be, there may be new jobs, but it won't be a plethora. But we do have 2 more on the hook that should be announcing in the next 60 days. We have one economic development deal at Stanton Springs that is fairly large, that we are among the finalists, so we should know something. We should know something any day, and it's exciting to be Shane Short right now. Keeping you also in the loop, the Industrial Building Authority didn't they pass the bond resolution?
The validation hearing was
Bond
yesterday
validation.
morning, and it's my understanding that the judge signed the validation order.
Okay. I will be in that meeting next Thursday at the Historic Courthouse. Not sure if it's going to be 6 or 7. I talked to the chairman today and should know more final details in the next couple of days. But that's one step closer to the jail becoming a reality off of Hammond or Georgia Avenue. That being said, I need a motion to adjourn, please.
Motion.
I have a motion by Mr. Norman Garrett. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Crawford. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.